Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line on TVP World. This is where we unpack the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. When Russia began the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the European Union decided it will wean itself off Russian gas by 2027. But now we hear members of the European business community, including CEOs of major energy companies, saying that they would still like to supply the commodity from Moscow. Let's hear the full story in Jan Kennedy's report.
For decades, Russia has been the leading provider of fossil fuels to the European Union. But in less than 2 years, that could become a thing of the past. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told the Financial Times that a roadmap to completely wean Europe off Russian energy imports starting 2027 will see daylight in a few weeks. But for the time being, major hurdles persist.
The rumors are floating in Brussels that the main, for now, the main issue is the standing long-term contracts and how make companies, European companies, not to pay to Russia if these contracts would be basically cut.
Such a ban would require a unanimous decision from all 27 member states, which landlocked Slovakia and Hungary would likely oppose. Another option, according to Brussels-based think tank Bruegel, would be to impose tariffs which don't require unanimity. But it also seems that some members of the European business community have become more open to discussing a resumption of the Russian supply.
Europe will never go back to importing 150 billion cubic meters from Russia like before the war, but I would bet maybe 70 BCM.
And it's not only big energy firms, and not only in France. Another example is the operator of Leuna, one of Germany's biggest chemical plants.
That would be an important incentive for Russia in the peace negotiations. For Ukraine, it would mean income from transit fees. For European industry, natural gas prices would fall and competitiveness would increase.
Why is the talk about Russian gas back? Executives say that they are desperate for a cheaper source of supply as the energy crisis chips away at their profits.
Last year we made a loss for the first time since the privatization 30 years ago. Not a small one. We can't afford that in the long term. Our electricity costs were just over 1 million a month before the crisis. Now we are at 2.3 million.
For decades, the company relied on cheap imports of Russian pipeline gas, which were cut off after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. In 2024, Russia supplied around 18% of the EU's demand for natural gas, 11% of which was sent via pipelines, the rest in liquefied form. US LNG deliveries covered 16% of the demand and have been a crucial replacement for the Russian commodity. However, since Donald Trump's return to office, relations between Washington and Brussels have soured, raising concerns about the reliability of US supply. But experts see these woes as far-fetched.
The US, I wouldn't call them, for now, unreliable partners, because, well, companies trade, and the system in the United States, of course, is totally different than in comparison to Russia.
Katinas added that while discounted Russian pipeline deliveries may seem tempting, tightening cooperation with the Kremlin will eventually come back to bite the EU.
You can solve some issues in the short-term period when it comes to Russian gas. However, in the long period, the price might increase, because Russia already proved numerous times for the past 35 years that around 50 or 60 times they were not credible partners.
For the time being, Russian gas continues flowing to Europe. The coming weeks will tell whether it will stop.
So on the one hand, we see the European Commission looking for ways to stop the flow of Russian gas, and on the other, we have businesses suggesting ramping up supplies from Moscow. We're now joined by Szymon Kardaś, Senior Fellow from the European Council on Foreign Relations, to tell us more about this. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
So the EU wants to wean itself off Russian gas by 2027, but at the same time, we see that imports increased by 18% in 2024, but imports flowed into Czechia, Italy and France. So tell us, how strong is the European resolve to actually cut itself off Russian gas entirely?
Well, actually, I believe that it's one of our biggest achievements in the last few years. I mean, decreasing the level of dependence on Russian gas supplies. I mean, in 2021, we've been importing around 155 billion cubic meters. Last year, it was around 55 billion cubic meters. So it's quite an achievement that we managed to so significantly decrease the level of dependence in a pretty short period of time. And actually, what we would need to do is to be on track. I mean, in terms of reaching the goal that was designed by the European Commission in 2022 in the Repower EU program, I mean, to completely phase out Russian fossil fuels. Because actually, it's not much to get rid of, I mean, in terms of natural gas supplies. And considering the growing number of LNG export terminals worldwide and the plans of the biggest exporters like the United States, like Qatar, but also Australia, I mean, we could have access to alternative sources of supply, so we definitely do not need to go into more supplies from Russia. We should actually be on track to phase out Russian natural gas from the EU's energy landscape.
So you think that that 2027 deadline is achievable because it's essentially a year and a half from now? And the plan isn't necessarily very clear. We're awaiting a plan to be announced in May with a delay because, as I understand, there has been a delay to announcing this plan.
Yeah, I mean, it is a delay. And actually, I mean, the plan has been delayed twice because it was supposed to be published in February, then it was postponed to March. In March, we've been told that, well, we need to wait a bit longer. And now, finally, the Commission announced that the roadmap will be published on the 6th of May. So we need to wait patiently a few more weeks. And I'm very much looking forward to what the details would be, I mean, in terms of the concrete steps that we need to take in order to phase out Russian fossil fuels, including natural gas. And referring to your question, I mean, whether it is doable or not, I mean, in 2022, it seemed to me that it is impossible to phase out 100 billion cubic meters of Russian natural gas in such a short period of time. And actually, we managed to do it. So this 55 BCM remaining, it's not much. And even if we are not able to completely phase out those volumes by 2027, we should definitely design a roadmap that would allow us to be on track in terms of phasing those supplies out. And as I said, I mean, we have a large number of unused capacity of LNG regasification terminals in the EU. I mean, actually, in 2023, the level of utilization of the all regasification terminals in the European Union was around 53-54%. So there is still a quite large capacity to be utilized for supplies from other regions. So,
but it sounds like It actually sounds like you should be speaking not to me, but to Mr. Patrick Pouyanné. If we could just bring up that quote from him, the CEO of the French energy giant Totalenergies, who actually said that he maybe perhaps doesn't imagine Europe going back to importing 150 billion cubic meters from Russia like before the war, but he does imagine 70 billion cubic meters. And many business entrepreneurs in Germany and France actually are quite keen to go back to importing Russian energy. Why is that? If you sound like it seems pretty doable to wean Europe off Russian energy, why is that? Why the discrepancy in opinions, essentially?
Well, I mean, my assumption is that, well, the CEOs of key energy European energy companies are first of all, I mean, they first of all have in mind that Russian gas used to be quite cheap. I mean, in terms of the prices that Western European companies were paying to Gazprom. And definitely, I mean, if we look back into decades of quite fruitful cooperation between Austria and Russia, Germany and Russia, also France and Russia, I mean, it's not surprising that some business circles would like to go back to business as usual, because, I mean, they were actually beneficiaries of decades of quite fruitful energy cooperation with their Russian counterparts. So on the one hand, it's understood. What's more, I mean, in terms of France, they are still importing Russian natural gas as an LNG, and Total actually has a long-term contract with the Yamal LNG consortium, where Novatek, I mean, the second biggest Russian gas company, is involved. And despite the war, actually, the supplies are still going without any interruptions. So they have, I mean, still good experience in dealing with Russians. So I mean, this is one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin should be that actually, I mean, in 2021, but specifically in 2022, it was Russia that decided to, first of all, significantly decrease and finally cut off supplies through Nord Stream 1, through Yamal Europe pipeline. So not only Central European countries were affected, but also Western countries were affected. They were forced to look for alternative sources of supply quite quickly, which came at a pretty high cost. So my question is whether the CEOs of those companies want still risk that, well, I mean, when there are no political tensions, the gas is flowing, and of course, I mean, this business as usual mode is quite beneficial, is quite beneficiary for them. But when suddenly some political tensions appear, I mean, Russia proves to be unreliable supplier because it is able to use supplies of energy resources as a political weapon and affect European countries in such a way that it creates huge problems and huge costs.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, this is the dilemma.
Exactly. And I'm going to ask you another question to follow up with that. We hear that there are rumors about restarting Nord Stream 2. So why are Europeans so keen on Russian gas?
Well, actually, I mean, when it comes to Nord Streams, there's one clarification needs to be made. I mean, we have two Nord Streams, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 1, which consists of two pipelines, was in operation by 2022. And Nord Stream 2 was the pipeline that was constructed by Russia, and the construction ended in September 2021, but was not put into operation because, I mean, the certification process was suspended, and actually Gazprom was not able to launch the pipeline for supplying natural gas to European customers. So when we talk about the relaunching of Nord Streams, I mean, in the first place, it refers to Nord Stream 1. I mean, first of all, we would have to repair the pipeline because it was damaged in September 2022. And both lines of Nord Stream 1 are damaged and one line of Nord Stream 2 is damaged. So first of all, I mean, the parties involved should repair it. And secondly, I mean, it seems quite. It would be quite difficult from the political point of view. I mean, to relaunch the pipeline that caused so many debates within Europe, and considering that Germany was affected by the cut of supplies of natural gas through Nord Stream 1, it would be politically very sensitive. I mean, I mean, consider seriously relaunching this very this very
sensitive,
problematic pipeline.
Absolutely. I wanted to go back to the headline of this week. The European Commission announced that it's going to be exploring options to implement the force majeure clause for European companies still dependent on Russian energy. I wanted to ask you to explain this legal clause and what it actually means for European companies, how long it might take, and whether perhaps this is meant to speed things up and encourage companies to actually move away from Russian gas.
Mm-hmm. Well, we need to wait for the details because actually this is one of the reasons why countries like Spain, France, Belgium are still importing Russian LNG, arguing that, well, there are no sanctions, there are no restrictions, but on the other hand, there are still long-term contracts in force. So, I mean, there is no legal basis for termination of those contracts. So that's why, I mean, we are still allowed to import it. Since the European Commission is fully aware that it probably would be really difficult to reach a consensus within the EU, I mean, regarding sanctioning the supplies of Russian natural gas to Europe, I see it as an attempt, I mean, to use some kind of a trade policy tools. And as we all know, the trade policy is an exclusive competence of the European Union. So probably the European Commission is trying to look for the trade policy instruments that would allow those countries that are still importing Russia's natural gas to use it as a kind of a justification for termination of the deal that are in force. Of course, we need to wait for the details, and I hope that on the 6th of May, when the European Commission is planning to announce the roadmap, I mean, some more details would be provided because, as we all know, I mean, the devil is in the details, yeah, and especially when it comes to legal measures, because, I mean, we are looking for an effective legal measures that would allow those countries that are still importing Russian gas based on the contracts that are in force to allow them, I mean, to terminate them. So we need to wait for the details. But I read it as an attempt, I mean, to use some kind of a trade policy instruments that would serve the purpose of phasing out Russian fossil fuels, including natural gas, from the EU energy landscape.
Can these trade policies that you're referring to, can they include tariffs? And why is the force majeure clause only being looked into now?
Well, the tariffs, I mean, yeah, this is actually one of the options, and probably it could be a kind of a solution to the problem, because as I said previously, I mean, it would be difficult to reach a consensus regarding sanctions, and here we need a consent of all EU member states, I mean, to impose sanctions, and we know that it would be very, very difficult, if not impossible. So tariffs or some quotas are probably, but quotas would not lead to phasing out, because we will agree that, okay, I mean, certain amounts of Russian natural gas are still allowed to be imported to the EU. So tariffs as a measure that would make the Russian natural gas, I mean, less attractive in terms of the cheap source of energy could be a good option, because I mean, this is something that is part of the catalog of instruments that is an exclusive competence of the European Union, of the European Commission, and no unanimity is needed when we want to impose that kind of measures. So yeah, I mean, that could be a very interesting option, and I'm very much looking forward to the details that I suppose would be revealed on the 6th of May.
Okay, Szymon Kardaś, Senior Fellow from the European Council of Foreign Relations. A pleasure speaking to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that wraps up The Bottom Line today. I was your host, Marie Cato. We're on every weekday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. And in the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. For more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.